granted to male soldiers. In July 1943, after thousands of women had enlisted, the U.S. Army dropped the auxiliary status and granted them now just WACs, full U.S. Army benefits. WACs worked as nurses, ambulance drivers, radio operators, electricians, and pilots, nearly everything that wasn't on the battlefield.
So our next question is, how did factories go from public production to war production? Early in February 1942, the newspaper reported the end of automotive production for private use. The last car to roll off was a gray sedan with Victory trim, that is without chrome-plated parts. The automotive plants were retooled to produce tanks, boats, and command cars. Shortly after the end of the automotive production, other factories across the nations were being shut down and retooled for military production. A couple examples: a mechanical pencilry factory was retooled to make bomb parts, and a bread spread manufactory was retooled for mosquito netting. Meanwhile, shipyards and defense plants expanded with dizzying speeds. By the end of 1942, industrialist Henry J. Kaiser had built 7 massive new shipyards that turned out Liberty ships, troop transports, and baby aircraft carriers at an astonishing rate. One of his shipyards broke a record of building a Liberty ship in just 4 days.
Question number 7. What was the result of the Battle of the Bulge? And question number 8, going kind of off the board here. This group talked about an American hero. We had a local one. So answer the question, who is Richard Bong and what local structure is named after him?
Our first question is it appropriate to only offer unconditional surrender? And we think that no, it's not okay to dictate another group of people that are already offering their surrender, but are being forced to give more. But at the same time, sometimes, because like in the case of Germany's surrender in World War II, the Allies offered unconditional surrender to Germany, forcing all German forces to surrender to the Allies. The United States and Britain joined forces after the attack on Pearl Harbor and created a remarkable alliance between their two nations.
Next question is, what did Hitler hope for in the Battle of the Bulge, and what happened? In the Battle of the Bulge, Hitler hoped that a victory would split U.S. and British forces and break up Allied supply lines. Tanks drove 60 miles into Allied territory, which created a bulge in the lines, which is what gave this battle its name. The Germans went west and captured 120 Americans, and the German troops pushed the prisoners into a large field and shot them down with machine guns and pistols. In the end, the Germans had lost 120,000 troops, 600 tanks and guns, and 106,000 planes. From that point, the Nazis could do nothing but retreat.
What's in the secret compartment today? It's Lieutenant General Dwight David Eisenhower. He was chosen to become the Supreme Commander of U.S. forces in Europe by George Marshall. One of the great talents that Eisenhower had was his ability to work with different people, even allies. Many people admired Eisenhower. He was also in charge of launching Operation Torch. Germany's aim in the Battle of the Atlantic was to prevent food and war material from reaching Great Britain and the Soviet Union. Britain depended on supplies from the sea.
After U.S. and Britain joined forces, Prime Minister Churchill arrived at the White House in 1941 and worked out war plans with President Roosevelt. Churchill convinced Roosevelt to strike first against Hitler.
The Soviet army pushed towards the west, going across Poland, heading to Berlin. They were the first to come across a Nazi death camp in July 1944. The camp was called Majdanek. The SS guards in Poland tried to get rid of the evidence of their terrible crimes that they did, but the Soviets got there before they finished covering everything up. Majdanek was the world's largest crematorium.
Who is Audie Murphy? Audie Murphy is the most decorated American soldier of the war. He received 24 medals from the U.S. and 3 medals from France and 1 by Belgium. His most impressive act of bravery occurred in France in the midst of a furious German attack. He jumped onto a burning tank destroyer and killed about 50 Axis troops with his machine gun.
Question number 9. How did the government justify internment camps, and what were the conditions in these camps?
Hi, I'm Drake. Welcome to Triple C, OK Crash Course.
Hi, I'm Joe Backus.
And I'm Joe Backus.
This is Cloquet Crash Course, and today we're going to be focusing on some viewer-submitted questions from you. First question from the secret envelope, in the secret backpack, in the secret hallway of the secret school.
If you could open up the envelope.
Ah, what are zoot suits? Suits are bulky men's suits which were a popular style among African American, Chicano, and Italian Americans during the 1940s.
They were a popular fad amongst young minorities. To the government, they represented rebelliousness, and overall, the government prohibited and made the claim that zoot suits were using too much cloth, and that cloth could have been contributed to the war efforts. Along with the extravagance of them, they were considered unpatriotic, but the case was most likely an effort to deculture African Americans and Latinos. The most notable incidents for zoot suits were the Zoot Suit riots, where hordes of Latin and African American youths and adults protested in multiple cities in response to a very controversial trial. And the trial was commonly known as the Sleepy Lagoon murder. We're not going to go in depth on that one, though.
2, 1.
Now that we covered zoot suits, it's time to do another viewer-submitted question from the secret document.
Our question is, why were the internment camps located in the West?
2 months after the bombing of Pearl Harbor, U.S. President FDR signed Executive Order 9066, ordering all Japanese Americans to evacuate the West Coast and be put into internment camps. An internment camp is a prison-like camp for a specific race or type of person, where they are held against their will. This was the result of 120,000 people having to relocate, most of whom were American citizens. It was pretty much like what Hitler did. The reasoning for them being located in the West was because a majority of the Japanese American population was concentrated along the West Coast and the Midwest. Conditions in these internment camps were not terrible, but they weren't great. They were fed 3 square meals a day. Although not the most nutritious meals, they were something. Prisoners in these camps were also paid if they were willing to do work, although sometimes complaining that they were always hungry due to the lack of food. Oftentimes up to 10 people would be packed into one little cellar, or like a sleeping room. That's all they really had. Blast from the past. In these camps, prisoners that worked were often paid $13 to $19 a month. They also had musical entertainment sometimes. They were fed 3 meals a day, but they weren't always the biggest and most nutritious meals ever. It was just all around a bad place. There are some ancient records even saying that some people who tried to escape were shot on sight or shot trying to climb the fence. It was all around a really bad place, but probably not as bad as the death camps in Europe. There was a commonly used phrase called shaka ga naya, which meant it cannot be helped. The Japanese used this phrase to describe the helplessness of the living conditions.
And that's the end of Cloquet Crash Course.
Final question, question number 10. What was the mentality of the Japanese fighters, and how did that mentality contribute to the decision to drop the atomic bombs?
What events led up to the Japanese using the
kamikaze pilot tactic. The Japanese used the kamikaze tactic, which means divine wind. This tactic was used to stop the Allies' offensive, their aerial and naval attacks. Most of the kamikaze pilots were volunteers. The first kamikaze attack consisted of 24 pilots. The first raid was in 1944 during the Battle of Leyte Gulf. The Japanese designed the Oka, meaning cherry blossom. It was especially made for kamikaze raids because it was powered by rockets. It allowed them to suicide bomb the Allied ships.
No, I don't think we could have won. The nuke killed at least 40,000 troops just at the bombing of Hiroshima, and a total of 66,000. But if you add Nagasaki, there is an estimated total of 129,000 people dead. It also resulted in enemy troops grieving over family members, also setting an example, showing our power to the Axis powers. Also no, because the Japanese said they would rather die with honor for their country than surrender.
Why was the Manhattan Project so secretive? It was so secretive that the Vice President, Harry Truman, didn't even know about it until after the president died. They kept it so secretive because they didn't want the enemy or the public to know that they had weapons of mass destruction. Truman said it was a hammer on the Russians. The scientists weren't even sure if the bomb would work, and they didn't want feedback from the Allies.
Oh, wow. It's a raid on the U.S. Navy by the Japanese using their little kamikaze planes. And now we're on fire. What are we going to do? Who knows? Anyway, yeah, this is the Oka plane used by the Japanese. It is their most common kamikaze raid plane because it is powered by jet fuel. And it allows them just to go straight up in the air and then just come down right on top of a ship or anything like that. And most of these were used to stop the U.S. Navy's naval and aerial attacks on Japan. This was mostly used because of they were like mostly desperate towards the end of the war, so they started using the kamikaze tactic. Yeah, done. Alright, and then that's the end of our video, and yeah. So our 3 questions that we were supposed to answer were, the first one was, what events led up to the Japanese using the kamikaze tactic? The second one was, could we have won the war without the use of the atomic bomb on Hiroshima? And the third one was, why the Manhattan Project was so secret. We never really answered the third one because we couldn't really find anything on it, but it was so secret that the vice president didn't even know about it, so yeah.
Well done, everybody, and remember, the test is due on Thursday.